The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild might be an easy and obvious contender for Game of the Year when it comes to deciding what Game of the Year is in December, but where the main game is something of a no-brainer purchase for Wii U and Switch owners, its first DLC pack is a less clear-cut proposition. The Master Trials broadens the game in a few directions, adding more challenging modes, more outfits, and gear that aid you in exploration, but it feels far from being essential. For those still finding new places to explore and things to discover as they play the game, the best additions might well be the Travel Medallion, the Korok Mask, and the Hero's Path map in the Sheikah Slate. The medallion lets you create a temporary teleportation point wherever you're stood, allowing you to do this, nip back to a shop and stock up on arrows, for example, and then head right back to where you were, cutting out some of the journey time if you had to go back to a shrine, for example, as the nearest fast travel point. Meanwhile, the Korok Mask wiggles whenever you're near a Korok Seed, helping you find the 900 of the sodding things in the world, and the Hero's Path map shows up to 200 hours of playtime on the map, visualizing it for you to show you exactly where you've been. You can either just see like the full overlay, or you can actually rewind time and rewatch your journey from the very beginning if you really want to. But most importantly, it shows you all of the places where you've been and all of the places where you are yet to explore. Combining these together, they make exploring Hyrule quite a bit easier, but they also feel like they shouldn't actually be in a DLC pack in the first place. These are simply tools for players that could and should have been in a free update to the game. The medallion simply saves a small amount of time in exploring the world, while the Korok Mask effectively replicates a function of the Sheikah Slate scanner for one particular collectible. And that in and of itself is just ridiculous. The scanner can do this for dozens of different things, so why can't it do that for the Korok Seeds as well? Beyond the Korok Mask, there are some other nice costumes added with the DLC. You've got Majora's Mask, you've got Midna's helmet from Twilight Princess, and the Tingle onesie and Phantom armor, both as homages to Wind Waker. They don't do much that's new in comparison to armor sets already within the game, but they're a nice series of homages for fans of the series, definitely. More significant and satisfying is the Trial of the Sword, and this is accessible once you've actually found the Master Sword in the game, pitched as a way of unleashing the true power within the sword so that you can defeat enemies just that little bit easier. For those who've explored the world quite a lot, it takes the core idea behind Eventide Island and runs with it. So you're stripped of all of your items and you're dropped into an arena cut off from the rest of the world to try and tackle 42 floors of enemies. First there's small groups of bokoblin, maybe a few choo-choos, and then this gets progressively more difficult while keeping the enemies nice and varied from one wave to the next. Thankfully, you do have moments of respite, with certain levels just there to let you recuperate, open a few chests of items, and cook up some food that you found. The one hint that I'll give you is to remember that you actually have the Sheikah Slate throughout all of this, and you should be very wary of grouped enemies, as a badly thought out assault, or letting the enemy get behind you and maybe get one or two hits in, can then put you at a big disadvantage in terms of health for later waves. It's challenging, but it's nothing compared to the Master Mode difficulty. This runs alongside the normal difficulty, so you actually gain a second slot just for Master Mode, which is a blessing in its own right. But it takes the entire game and adjusts the difficulty across the board. All of the enemies in the game are at least one stage more difficulty, and they've also been spread out a little bit differently as well. Worse than that, if you're not consistently dealing damage, they will start to heal back up, completely changing the dynamic of combat and forcing you to attack decisively instead of chipping away at an enemy or biding your time. The first few encounters on the Great Plateau are pretty horrible because of this, as you find yourself completely and utterly outmatched by the dark blue bokoblin you face. And it's because you're having to make do with the same lowly weaponry as you would start the normal difficulty with. One-on-one fights take at least 3 times as long and demand that you know how to dodge and counter. Even the first pair of archers you meet just take an awful lot of damage just to, put them away so you can steal their bow and arrow. Then there's the fact that set pieces like pushing boulders down onto explosive barrels, but it doesn't kill the enemies anymore, it only damages them, and then the bokoblin quickly start to heal, so you need to follow it up as well. You really have to be aware of getting outnumbered at this early stage when you're running around with just 3 hearts to your health. Oh, and then some sadist at Nintendo decided that the plateau was the perfect place to put a white-maned Lionel. Thankfully, it doesn't take too long to get into the new groove and pick up better weapons, especially once you get down from the plateau. While I'm now a lot more wary of getting into combat in the first place, I'm also much more reliant on bow and arrow when I'm in a fight, as it can deal a lot of damage from afar, and it also lets you keep plugging away an enemy and keep them from healing. Not to mention that there's now archers up on platforms floating with Octorok balloons on each corner, so you need the bow and arrow to be able to shoot out the balloons and drop them to the ground. Pleasingly, these floating platforms can often have chests on them that hold vital rewards and resources, so the game is more difficult, but it also gives you a few more opportunities to get more gear. That initial difficulty will probably subside somewhat as you tap into your memories from the original game. I know that once I figured out that I needed to avoid enemies an awful lot more, I quickly got through the plateau, and it helps that the shrines that don't feature combat with guardians will be the same kind of mental challenge as before. In fact, they'll be identical. It's just that the opening hour or two are going to be pretty intimidating, and they have the intended effect of changing how you play the game. Sadly, this all adds up to a DLC pack that's actually rather underwhelming, especially in the context of previous DLC efforts from Nintendo. Mario Kart 8, for example, had 2 major track DLC packs, both of which also came with character skins and new karts and stuff like that, and they were at a very reasonable price, while things like the 200cc mode were then added for free. Breath of the Wild's DLC has the added oddity of only being available in an expansion pass bundle, with this first DLC pack being followed by something much more substantial later this year which actually goes to expand the story. The most important thing that the Master Trials did is that it's rekindled my interest in Breath of the Wild, and it's done this for a lot of people, as evidenced by the number of people in my friends list who are returning to the game, and it keeps the game in the forefront of people's minds before the Meteor expansion later this year is available. The thing is that it's a lot about perception. There's some really good stuff in this expansion pack, and it's just the fact that it wraps up a few features that I feel should have been handed out for free that gives it just that little bitter taste at the end of it. So it's strange, but it's actually difficult not to be disappointed by this package as a whole. Thanks as ever for watching, and we hope you enjoyed this video. Please do like, subscribe and share this with your friends, and also head over to thesixthaxis.com for these written impressions. We'll hopefully see you again next time, and until then, goodbye.